I was 65 years old the day my mind finally refused to obey me. It was not dramatic. No ambulance, no scream, no collapse. It was quieter than that, crueler in a way only silence can be. I stood in my kitchen holding a kettle I had already boiled twice, staring at the wall where the clock used to hang. I had taken it down months earlier because the ticking made me anxious, but in that moment I reached for time that wasn't there anymore. My hand hovered in the air, confused, trembling slightly as if it expected something solid to appear out of memory alone. I could not remember why I had boiled the water. I could not remember how long I had been standing there. And worst of all, I felt nothing about it. No panic, no fear, just emptiness. That was when I knew something inside me had finally broken. For years, no. For decades, I had ignored my mind the same way women of my generation were taught to ignore hunger, exhaustion, loneliness, and pain. You keep going. You don't complain. You do what must be done. You swallow thoughts the way you swallow medicine, quickly, without tasting, without asking what it's doing to you. I believed strength meant silence. I was wrong. My name is Eleanor May Whitaker, and this is the story of how a woman can live an entire lifetime doing everything right and still lose herself because she never listened to the one place that mattered most. Where I came from, I was born in 1959, the second daughter of a coal miner and a mother who believed tears were a private weakness. We lived in a narrow house with thin walls and thick expectations. Girls didn't dream, they prepared. Boys were allowed to wander. Girls were taught to endure. By the time I was 10, I knew how to cook for 6, clean without being asked, and smile even when my stomach hurt. When I cried once after my sister broke my favorite cup, my mother didn't scold me. She just looked tired. "Life doesn't stop because you're upset," she said. That sentence followed me for the rest of my life. At 16, I learned another rule. Your mind is dangerous if you let it wander too far. Questions led to disappointment. Feelings led to mistakes. So I learned to keep my thoughts busy. School, chores, church, helping neighbors, anything but listening to what I actually wanted. By 19, I was married. Not because I was in love, but because it was expected. An expectation can feel like destiny when you don't know you're allowed to say no. Thomas Whitaker was a good man by the standards of the time. He worked hard. He didn't drink much. He never hit me. People think that's a low bar now. But back then it was enough to be considered lucky. What no one asked and what I never said was whether I felt seen. The first cracks, I ignored my mind the first time it whispered to me on my wedding night. As Thomas slept beside me, his back turned, breathing deep and satisfied, I stared at the ceiling and felt an unexpected heaviness settle in my chest. A small voice inside me asked, "Is this it? Is this the rest of your life?" I pushed the thought away so fast it frightened me. Good wives don't doubt. Good women are grateful, so I became grateful. I filled my days with usefulness. 2 children, came first a boy, then a girl. I raised them with the same quiet discipline I was raised with. I told myself love didn't need words. Sacrifice was proof enough. When exhaustion crept in, I called it normal. When resentment flared, I called it ungrateful. When loneliness wrapped around me even in a full house, I called it weakness. Every time my mind tried to speak, I shut it down. I did not realize I was training it to disappear. The long middle by my 40s, I was known as strong. People said it like a compliment. "You're so strong, Eleanor. I don't know how you do it. You never complain." They didn't know that strength, when unexamined, turns into numbness. Thomas and I grew polite with each other. Conversations became functional bills, schedules, repairs. He didn't ask how I felt, because I had stopped offering feelings years earlier. I didn't ask about his inner life because I had forgotten inner lives existed. Our children grew up and moved away. The house got quieter. I told myself that was peace. But peace doesn't ache. At night, when the world slowed enough for my thoughts to catch up, my mind would send me signals: tightness in my chest, restless legs, a sudden urge to cry for no reason. I answered everyone the same way. Not now. There was always something else to do, something practical, something useful. I became very good at staying busy and very bad at being present. I did not know that ignoring your mind doesn't silence it. It stores everything. The year everything changed. Thomas died when I was 62. A heart attack. Quick, painless, they said. I cried at the funeral because that was what wives did. But inside, there was a strange mixture of grief and relief that filled me with shame. When the house emptied after the service, I sat alone on the edge of the bed and waited for something devastation, maybe, or clarity. Instead, there was just a vast echoing quiet. For the first time in my life, no one needed me. No meals to cook for him, no laundry to fold, no expectations to meet, and suddenly, my mind neglected, unheard for decades came rushing back like a flood breaking through a weakened dam. Thoughts I had buried resurfaced with force. Regrets, unlived lives, questions with no answers. I couldn't sleep. When I did, I dreamed of rooms with no doors. I started forgetting small things, names, appointments, why I walked into a room. Doctors called it stress, grief, age. I called it manageable. I always did. The breaking point. The kettle incident happened 3 years later. That was the morning I understood the cost of a lifetime of silence. I sat at the kitchen table afterward, hands folded, heart pounding, not with fear but with recognition. My mind wasn't betraying me. It was exhausted. It had carried decades of unprocessed emotion, swallowed words, postponed grief. And now it was demanding to be heard. I looked around the kitchen, the same one I had cooked in for 45 years, and felt like a stranger in my own life. I had survived everything, but I had not lived inside myself. That realization hurt more than any loss. I whispered aloud, my voice rough from disuse, I don't know who I am. The room did not answer, but something inside me finally did. The strange thing about finally hearing your mind after decades of ignoring it is that it doesn't start with answers, it starts with noise. After the morning with the kettle, I expected fear to arrive, panic, confusion, maybe even tears. Instead, what came was a relentless hum inside my head, like a radio stuck between stations. Thoughts overlapped, memories surfaced without order, feelings arrived without names. For the first time in my life, I did not know how to manage myself. And that terrified me more than any illness ever could. I spent that entire day sitting at the kitchen table, the kettle cold beside me, untouched. Outside, the world continued with its cruel normalcy. A neighbor laughed. A car passed. Somewhere a child cried and was comforted. Life, apparently, did not stop because I was unraveling. That sentence, my mother's sentence, echoed back at me. Life doesn't stop because you're upset. I realized then how deeply that belief had carved itself into me. I had built my entire existence around it. I had lived as if emotions were inconveniences and thoughts were obstacles to productivity. And now, at 65, my mind was demanding repayment. The flood of memory that night, sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it brought no rest, only memories. Not the big ones people talk about at family gatherings. Not weddings or births or holidays. The small ones. The afternoon I wanted to enroll in a night literature class but decided against it because dinner needed to be ready. The job offer at the library I declined because Thomas didn't like the commute. The journal I bought in my 30s and never wrote in, its pages still blank somewhere in a drawer. I woke up gasping, my heart racing, my mouth dry. For the first time, I did not push the feelings away. I let them sit with me. And God, did they hurt. Regret is not loud. It doesn't scream. It presses. Slowly, relentlessly, like weight on the chest that makes every breath deliberate. I whispered into the darkness. I did my best. The words sounded weak even to me, because deep down I knew the truth. I had done what was expected, not what was needed. When the body speaks for the mind. The weeks that followed were worse. My body began betraying me in ways I couldn't ignore. My hands shook when I tried to write grocery lists. My heart raced without warning. I forgot conversations I'd had just hours earlier. The doctor ran tests, blood work, scans. You're healthy for your age, he said gently. This could be anxiety, prolonged stress, unprocessed grief. Unprocessed, Dreefort. Unprocessed. That word clung to me. I had processed meals, schedules, responsibilities, and people, but never myself. At home, I tried to distract myself the way I always had. Cleaning, organizing, rearranging drawers that had been orderly for years. But no matter how busy my hands were, my mind refused to quiet. It was like a child who had been ignored for too long and now demanded attention in the only way it knew how, by screaming. The mirror moment. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I had avoided mirrors lately. They asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. But that day, I stopped. The woman staring back at me looked older than 65, not because of wrinkles, those I had earned honestly, but because of something hollow behind the eyes, a tiredness that sleep couldn't fix. I leaned closer. "When did you disappear?" I asked her. She didn't answer, but my mind did, little by little, choice by choice, silence by silence. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor, my back against the paint I had chosen years ago because Thomas liked it. I laughed, then a short, broken sound that startled even me. I didn't even know what colors I liked. The realization cracked something open inside me. The weight of being needed. People romanticize being needed. They call it purpose. They praise women who give endlessly. What they don't tell you is this: when your entire identity is built on being needed, you collapse when you're not. After Thomas died and the children built lives of their own, I told myself I was adjusting well. But in truth, I was disappearing. Without anyone to serve, I had no language for who I was. I had never asked myself, what do I enjoy? What do I believe? What do I want? Those questions felt almost sinful. So when my mind began asking them now, loudly and insistently, it felt like punishment. The first honest breakdown. It happened in the grocery store. I stood in the cereal aisle staring at dozens of boxes, overwhelmed by choice. A ridiculous thing, really. I'd fed a family for decades. And yet, there I was, heart pounding, vision blurring, unable to decide between oats and cornflakes. A young woman brushed past me impatiently. Something inside me snapped. I left the cart where it was and walked out, hands shaking so badly I had to sit in my car for nearly an hour before I could drive. I cried then. Not quietly, not politely. I cried like someone who had been holding their breath for 65 years and finally exhaled. I cried for the girl I had been. For the woman I never allowed myself to become. For the mind I had ignored until it broke under the weight of obedience. No one came to comfort me. And for once, that was okay. The hardest truth that night as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I admitted something I had never allowed myself to think. I had confused endurance with virtue. I had believed surviving was the same as living. My mind had not failed me. I had failed it. The thought did not crush me the way I expected. Instead, it settled into something heavier but clearer. Responsibility, not blame. Responsibility. And with it came the faintest, most unfamiliar feeling: choice. For the first time in my life, I wondered, quietly, cautiously, what might happen if I stopped running from my own thoughts? What might happen if I listened? Listening to your mind after ignoring it for a lifetime is not an act of courage, it is an act of surrender. For weeks after that night, I tried to bargain with myself. I told myself I would listen, but only a little. Only when it was convenient. Only when it didn't hurt too much. My mind did not agree to those terms. It had been silenced for too long to accept partial attention, so it brought the pain forward in full. The quiet days that hurt the most. There were no dramatic episodes after the grocery store breakdown, no scenes anyone would notice. What came instead were long, quiet days where nothing distracted me from myself. Mornings became unbearable. I would wake up before sunrise, my body stiff, my chest heavy, and lie there staring at the ceiling as memories drifted in without permission. The mind has a cruel way of showing you not just what happened, but what could have happened. I thought about the woman I might have been if I had said no more often. If I had allowed myself to disappoint people, if I had trusted that my thoughts mattered. Every memory carried a small grief attached to it. Not sharp grief, those wounds had scabbed over years ago. This was a dull, persistent ache, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes even simple tasks feel exhausting. I stopped turning on the television. Noise felt invasive. Music made me cry. Silence, however, was worse. Silence gave my mind room to stretch. And it stretched painfully. The fear of going back one morning, as I stood brushing my teeth, I suddenly forgot how long I had been doing it. The mirror fogged over, and for a moment I couldn't tell if minutes or seconds had passed. Fear finally arrived then. Real fear. Not of dying, but of losing myself completely. I gripped the sink and whispered, "Please don't take me away from me." It was the first time I had ever begged my own mind. I realized then how little kindness I had shown myself over the years. I had treated my mind like a misbehaving child, silencing it, disciplining it, never comforting it. No wonder it was screaming now. An unexpected invitation. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. A simple envelope, my name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a notice from the local community center, an invitation to a support group for older adults dealing with loss, anxiety, and life transitions. I laughed when I read it. Life transitions. At 65, I had assumed transitions were behind me, that life was something you survived, not something you reshaped. I set the letter aside and tried to forget about it, but my mind would not let me. For days, the thought lingered, not loud, not insistent, just present. Go. The idea terrified me. Talking about feelings in front of strangers went against every rule I had lived by. We didn't air our inner lives, we kept our pain tidy, private. But the alternative, staying alone with my thoughts, was beginning to feel more dangerous. The first step inside, the room smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. Metal chairs were arranged in a circle. A box of tissues sat in the middle like an unspoken promise. I almost turned around and left. My heart pounded as if I were doing something wrong, something shameful. I took a seat near the door, just in case. There were 7 other people. Men and women, most older than me. Some looked tired, others looked angry. A few looked completely lost. When the facilitator asked us to introduce ourselves and share why we were there, I froze. My turn came. My name is Eleanor, I said softly. And I think I've ignored my mind for too long. The words felt strange in my mouth. No one laughed. No one looked away. A woman across from me nodded slowly, as if she understood something deeply. Something loosened in my chest. The stories that broke me open. As others spoke, I listened. A man who had worked 40 years without taking a vacation and now didn't know how to rest. A woman who had spent her life caring for everyone else and now felt invisible. A widow who said she felt guilty for wanting more out of life even after loss. Their stories were different, but the pain was the same. We had all confused obligation with meaning. I felt my throat tighten. For the first time, my suffering did not feel unique or shameful. It felt human. When it was my turn again, words poured out of me in a way they never had before. Not neatly, not politely. I don't know who I am, I said. I was a wife, a mother, a caretaker. I did everything right. And now, I feel empty. I'm scared my mind is breaking. The facilitator didn't rush to reassure me. She said something far more unsettling. Sometimes, she said gently, what feels like breaking is actually waking up. That sentence stayed with me. The pain of awareness is not gentle. Once you see the patterns of your life, you cannot unsee them. I began noticing how often I dismissed my own discomfort, how quickly I apologized for existing, how deeply ingrained the belief was that my value came from usefulness. I saw it everywhere. In the way I spoke to strangers, in the way I justified exhaustion, in the way I felt guilty for resting. My mind was not punishing me. It was teaching me painfully what I'd never learned, that my feelings were signals, not inconveniences. That ignoring them had cost me decades. That listening now, though late, was still possible. The first lesson one evening after group, I walked home slowly instead of rushing the way I always had. The air was cool, the sky darkening. I noticed things I hadn't before: the sound of leaves underfoot, the ache in my knees, the quiet satisfaction of moving at my own pace. It wasn't happiness, but it was presence. For the first time in years, my mind was not racing ahead or dragging me backward. It was with me. And that, I realized, was the beginning of something terrifying and fragile: change. Healing does not arrive the way people describe it. There are no sudden breakthroughs, no warm waves of relief, no clean sense of progress. What comes instead is excavation. Once I started listening to my mind, it began handing me things I had buried carefully and deliberately. Not all at once, but persistently. Like a debt collector who knows you can no longer pretend you're not home. The past does not stay buried when it realizes you are finally paying attention. The memory that would not let go, it started with a dream. I was 27 again, standing in the doorway of a small apartment that smelled of dust and old books. Sunlight spilled across the floor, and for reasons I didn't understand, I was crying hard, silent sobs that shook my chest. I woke with my heart pounding. That apartment had been real. I hadn't thought about it in decades. It was the place where I almost left my marriage. The realization sat heavy in my chest as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, afraid to move, as if motion itself might pull more memories loose. That year, Thomas had been distant. Work stress, he said. Long hours, short patience. I had been lonely in a way that frightened me. And for once my mind had spoken clearly. This is not enough. I remembered standing in that apartment rented in secret, paid for with savings I had quietly set aside. I remembered imagining a life where I belonged to myself. No one yelling my name from another room. No one needing anything from me. I remembered how alive I had felt. And I remembered how quickly I had shut it down. Fear won. Guilt won. I had given up the apartment after 3 weeks and never spoken of it again. I had folded the dream neatly and buried it under years of responsibility. Until now, the grief of almost there is a special kind of grief reserved for the life you almost lived. It doesn't have a funeral. No one brings casseroles for it. No one tells you how sorry they are. But it lingers. That morning, I cried not for what I lost, but for what I chose not to take. I mourned the woman who had stood in that doorway and believed, briefly, that she deserved more. My mind was not being cruel. It was being honest. And honesty, I was learning, hurts. Anger finds its voice for decades. Anger had been the emotion I refused to feel. Anger was ugly, unladylike, dangerous. So I swallowed it until I forgot it existed. But once my mind realized it was finally allowed to speak, anger arrived with force. I found myself furious at small things, the way people spoke over me, the way my children assumed I would always be available, the way strangers dismissed older women like we were already half gone. One afternoon, my daughter called and casually said, "You don't really have much going on anyway, right?" The words hit harder than she intended. I hung up the phone and sat there shaking. I had built a life of service so complete that even my absence from it would barely register. And for the first time, I let myself feel the rage of that truth. I didn't suppress it. I didn't excuse it. I didn't rush past it. I sat with it. My mind did not implode. The world did not end. Instead, something unexpected happened. The anger softened, and beneath it was grief. The body remembers everything. As the weeks passed, my body began reacting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Old aches intensified. My chest tightened at random moments. Fatigue wrapped around me even after long rest. The facilitator at the group said something that stayed with me. The body remembers what the mind wasn't allowed to process. I had spent years forcing my body to carry unspoken emotional weight. It was no wonder it was tired. For the first time, I treated my physical discomfort not as an inconvenience, but as communication. I rested when I needed to. I slowed down without apologizing. I stopped pushing through pain out of habit. This felt radical, almost rebellious. A small, dangerous question. One afternoon, while sitting in the park watching leaves fall, a thought drifted into my mind. What if it's not too late? The question scared me more than despair ever had, because despair was familiar. Hope was not. Hope implied responsibility. It implied action. It implied that the rest of my life might still be shaped by choice rather than endurance. I tried to dismiss the thought, but my mind, now awake, refused. The first boundary. The opportunity came unexpectedly. My son called and asked if I could watch his children for 3 weeks while he and his wife traveled. He didn't ask if it worked for me. He assumed. The old Eleanor would have said yes immediately. My mouth opened, and then my mind spoke. "Do you want to?" The question stunned me. I closed my mouth. Took a breath. "I can help for a few days," I said carefully. "But not 3 weeks." Silence on the other end of the line. Then disappointment. Then irritation. I felt my chest tighten, but I did not take the words back. After the call ended, I sat there shaking. I had done something small and monumental. I had listened to myself. The aftermath guilt followed quickly. It always did. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. But this time, guilt did not control me. I let it exist without obeying it. And slowly, quietly, I noticed something new. Relief. Not joy, not pride. Relief. My mind had spoken. And for the first time I had answered. The life I was never taught to claim relief does not feel the way I imagined it would. It is not light or celebratory. It does not light your celebratory. It does not lift you off the ground. Relief is heavier than that. It settles into you slowly, like a deep breath you didn't realize you'd been holding for decades. It makes you aware of how suffocating everything was before. After I said no to my son, after I survived the disappointment in his voice and the familiar stab of guilt I expected punishment, some emotional consequence, anxiety, regret. Instead, my mind grew quieter, not silent, just calmer. As if it had been waiting its entire life for proof that I would finally protect it. The uncomfortable space of choice. With that quiet came something unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. Open space. When you've spent your life responding to demands, open space feels like danger. There was no schedule forcing me forward, no crisis requiring my competence, no one calling my name from another room. I woke up one morning with nothing I had to do. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt a strange panic rise in my chest. What do I do now? That question should have felt liberating. Instead, it exposed how unprepared I was to choose my own life. I realized then that I had never been taught how to want. The shame of desire had always felt selfish to me, indulgent, something that distracted women from their responsibilities. So when small wants began to surface, going for a walk without a destination, buying flowers just because I liked them, sitting in a cafe alone, I judged them harshly. You're being foolish. You should be useful. This isn't necessary. But my mind, newly awake, did not retreat. It asked gently, persistently, what if necessity isn't the point? Reclaiming small joys, I started with something almost embarrassingly simple. I bought a notebook. Not for lists, not for reminders, not for other people, for myself. The first page stayed blank for days. Every time I opened it, my hand froze. Writing felt too intimate, too exposed, as if acknowledging my thoughts might make them real and therefore demanding. One evening, I forced myself to write a single sentence, I don't know who I am without being needed. I stared at the words until my eyes burned. They were ugly, honest, mine. And they did not destroy me. The anger beneath the sadness. As the days passed, anger returned, but this time it was clearer, sharper, less chaotic. I was angry at the systems that praised my silence. Angry at the culture that taught women endurance but not fulfillment. Angry at myself for believing worth had to be earned through suffering. For years, I had blamed myself for feeling empty. Now I understood something crucial. I had been emotionally malnourished. No one thrives on sacrifice alone. The conversation I never had one afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, I found letters Thomas had written me early in our marriage. They were polite, practical, kind, but distant. I sat on the floor reading them, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel something I had never named before. Grief not just for his death, but for the intimacy we never built. I imagined a conversation we never had. I needed you to see me. I needed more than stability. I needed permission to be human. I said the words aloud into the empty room. They echoed back to me, unanswered. And then something unexpected happened. The weight lifted slightly. Not because the past had changed, but because I had finally told the truth, learning to disappoint without apology. As I continued setting boundaries, disappointment became a frequent visitor. Friends who expected my availability reacted with confusion. Family members pushed back gently, then not so gently. "You're different lately," one of them said. "You seem distant," another remarked. "You used to be easier." I smiled at that word. Yes, I had been easier to ignore, to overlook, to consume. I no longer corrected them. I let their discomfort exist. I was done shrinking to make others comfortable. The fear of wasted time late one night. The old fear returned. What if it's too late? What if all this awareness only arrived to torture me with what I could no longer have? What if the rest of my life was just a quiet countdown? I sat with that fear instead of running from it, and slowly, something softened. Time, I realized, does not invalidate meaning. A late bloom is still a bloom. The first real choice, I signed up for a writing class at the community center. My hand trembled as I filled out the form. 65 years old. A beginner. The old voice mocked me immediately. What's the point? But another voice, newer, steadier, answered back, the point is that you want to. When I left the building, the air felt different, sharper, more alive. I hadn't changed my whole life, but I'd claimed a piece of it, and for the first time, my mind did not feel like an enemy. It felt like an ally I was finally learning to trust. When the world pushes back, the moment you stop living quietly, the world notices. Not with celebration, not with understanding, but with resistance. I discovered this slowly in ways that at first seemed small enough to ignore. A pause before someone responded to me. A raised eyebrow when I declined an invitation. The subtle shift in tone when I didn't explain myself the way I used to. People were used to a version of me that required nothing, and I was no longer her. The cost of change. The writing class met on Thursday evenings. I arrived early the first night and chose a seat near the window. My notebook clutched to my chest like something fragile. There were 12 of us. Most were younger, confident, loud in that effortless way people are when they believe they still have time. When the instructor asked why we were there, people spoke about novels, blogs, dreams. When it was my turn, my voice wavered. "I'm here because I spent most of my life not saying things," I said. "And I don't want to do that anymore." The room went quiet, not uncomfortable, just attentive. That surprised me. What surprised me more was how much I trembled afterward. Not from fear, but from release. Speaking truth aloud still felt dangerous, but it also felt like oxygen. I went home lighter and heavier. Because change, I was learning, is not free. The unraveling of old roles. My daughter visited one Sunday afternoon. She sat at the kitchen table where I had once boiled that forgotten kettle, scrolling on her phone while I made tea. "You seem different," she said casually. I waited. "You don't call as much," she continued. "You don't jump in to help the way you used to." There it was. Not accusation. Observation. "I'm still here," I said carefully. "I'm just listening to myself more." She frowned slightly. "I just worry you're isolating yourself." I looked at her, looked at her and saw a woman who had grown up watching her mother disappear into service. "I'm not isolating," I said softly. "I'm emerging." She didn't respond right away. Some truths take time to land. Loneliness, revisited. There were days when doubt crept back in quietly. On those days, loneliness returned, not the busy loneliness of a crowded house, but the sharp kind that comes with stepping outside familiar patterns. When you stop playing your assigned role, you lose the comfort of predictability. Some friends stopped calling. Others seemed unsure how to relate to me without requests attached. I grieved those losses more than I expected, not because the relationships were deep, but because they confirmed a painful truth. Many people loved what I provided. Few knew who I was. The temptation to retreat. There were moments late at night, especially when the temptation to retreat felt overwhelming. It would have been easier to go back, to apologize, to explain, to smooth over discomfort. I knew exactly how to be the woman everyone expected, but my mind, now awake, whispered something new. "You will not survive that twice." The thought chilled me. I understood then that ignoring my mind again would cost me more than confusion. It would cost me what little life I had left. A breakthrough on paper. In writing class, we were asked to write about a moment that changed us. I stared at the page for a long time. Then I wrote about the kettle, the forgotten water, the empty wall, the sudden awareness that my mind was no longer willing to carry my silence. When I read it aloud, my hands shook. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then the instructor said, "That's not just a story, that's a reckoning." I walked home that night under streetlights that seemed brighter than usual. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of my voice. The lesson of resistance change invites resistance not because it is wrong, but because it disrupts comfort. I was disrupting decades of expectation. And every time I held my ground, every time I chose honesty over habit, I felt a small, steady strengthening inside me. Not confidence. Alignment. My mind and I were finally working together. The question of forgiveness. One evening, as I reread old journal entries, a question surfaced quietly. "Can you forgive yourself?" The question stunned me. I had been so focused on understanding, on reclaiming, on rebuilding, yet forgiveness had never entered the conversation. Forgiving myself meant acknowledging that I had choices, even then. Forgiving myself meant releasing the belief that endurance was the only option I had ever had. I closed the notebook and sat with that question long into the night. Forgiveness, I realized, might be the hardest step yet. But it was coming. I could feel it. Forgiveness does not arrive like mercy, it arrives like work. After that night with the question, "Can you forgive yourself?" I found that my mind would not let me rest until I faced it honestly. Forgiving others had always been easier for me. It kept the peace. It made me useful. But forgiving myself required something I had avoided my entire life: ownership. Not blame, not punishment. Ownership of the fact that I had participated in my own erasure. That truth sat heavy in my chest for days. The trial inside my head. My mind became a courtroom. On one side stood the younger versions of me, the obedient daughter, the careful wife, the selfless mother, each holding their reasons like shields. On the other side stood the woman I was now, tired but finally awake, asking the questions no one had allowed before. Why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you leave? Why did you stay silent for so long? The answers came slowly, painfully. Because I was afraid. Because I didn't know another way. Because survival felt safer than honesty. For the first time, I did not dismiss those answers as excuses. I saw them as context. Meeting my younger self. One exercise in writing class asked us to write a letter to ourselves at a pivotal age. I chose 27, the age of the apartment, the age of almost. My pen hovered above the page for a long time before words came. I know you think you're weak, I wrote, but you are carrying more than anyone ever taught you how to hold. You are not cowardly for staying. You are human. Halfway through the letter, I began to cry. Not the sharp, breaking kind. The quiet, soaking kind that leaves you exhausted afterward. I folded the letter and placed it in my notebook like a fragile artifact. Something shifted after that. The anger softened again, and beneath it, compassion emerged. The unexpected apology. I didn't plan it. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon while I was cleaning out a closet. I found an old dress, blue, modest, practical, that I had worn to countless events because it was appropriate. I held it up and felt a wave of sadness so strong it nearly knocked me over. "I'm sorry," I said aloud. The words surprised me. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you," I continued. "I'm sorry I made you small. I didn't know how to do better." My voice cracked. But I didn't stop. I know now. The room was silent. But inside me, something released. The fear of being seen as forgiveness took root. Another fear surfaced. Visibility. If I forgave myself, truly forgave myself, I would no longer be hiding behind guilt or obligation. I would be visible to myself and to others. That was dangerous. Visibility invites judgment. But invisibility, I had learned, invites decay. I began speaking more honestly in group sessions, writing more boldly, allowing my voice to carry weight instead of apology. Some people leaned in, others leaned away. I let both happen. A conversation that changed everything. My daughter called one evening. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. "About emerging." I stayed quiet. "I didn't realize how much you gave up," she said. "I just assumed you were okay." Her voice wavered slightly. "I was okay," I replied gently. "But okay isn't the same as whole." There was a long pause. "I don't want to repeat that," she said finally. "Neither do I thought. That conversation didn't fix the past. But it softened the future. The lesson of late blooming. One afternoon, as I walked home from class, I noticed a flower pushing through a crack in the sidewalk. Small, bright, defiant. I stopped and stared at it longer than necessary. Late bloom. The phrase no longer hurt. It felt earned. I was not behind. I was on time for me. Choosing myself again. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant releasing the belief that my life was over because I had lived part of it asleep. Every day, I chose myself again. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, consistently. And each choice made the next one easier. I was no longer running from my mind, I was walking with it. Side by side, there is a moment quiet, unremarkable to anyone watching when you realize you are no longer afraid of yourself. It does not arrive with certainty. It does not feel like victory. It feels like steadiness. That moment came to me on an ordinary morning, years after I had first ignored the kettle, years after my mind finally forced me to listen. I was sitting by the window, notebook open, sunlight resting gently on my hands. I had been writing for nearly an hour, not to impress, not to explain, not to justify, but simply to record what I noticed. My breath, the hum of the street, the way my thoughts no longer rushed ahead of me, and suddenly, without warning, I understood something that brought tears to my eyes. My mind was no longer breaking. It had finished breaking me open. The truth about the breaking. For years, I believed the moment my mind faltered, the confusion, the panic, the forgetting was the beginning of my decline. I was wrong. That breaking point was an intervention. My mind had carried a lifetime of unspoken grief, swallowed anger, delayed longing, and obedient silence. It had waited patiently while I chose endurance over truth, usefulness over presence, until it could not. The breaking was not cruelty, it was mercy. If that moment in the kitchen had not happened, if my mind had not finally refused to carry my silence, I would have continued existing politely until the end, never knowing what it felt like to belong to myself. The life I live now, I am older now than I was when my mind first demanded attention, but I am more alive. I live more slowly, intentionally. I rest without apology. I speak without rehearsing. I listen to discomfort instead of silencing it. I still feel fear. I still feel regret. But neither controls me anymore. My days are simple. Writing in the morning, walking in the afternoon, conversations that are honest instead of efficient, silence that feels full instead of empty. I am no longer impressive, and I have never felt more complete. What I lost, and what I gained, I lost some relationships. I lost the illusion of being endlessly strong. I lost the approval that came from self-erasure. But I gained something far more valuable: agency. I gained the ability to choose my response instead of defaulting to duty. I gained the courage to disappoint without collapsing. I gained a relationship with my own mind, one built on trust instead of control. Most of all, I gained myself. The lesson I wish I had learned earlier. If there is one truth my life has taught me, it is this: ignoring your mind does not make you strong. It makes you disappear slowly. Your mind is not your enemy, it is your witness. Every ache, every breakdown, every moment of confusion carries a message, not of failure, but of unmet needs. Listen early, listen often. Do not wait until your mind has to break you just to be heard. To the woman I was. And the ones who are reading, if you are tired, it is not because you are weak. If you feel empty, it is not because you are ungrateful. If your mind feels loud, it is not because it is broken. It is because it has been ignored. And it is asking quietly or desperately to be included in your life. Do not wait as long as I did. But if you are older, worn down, afraid it is too late, know this: awareness is not punishment. It is permission. The end. In the beginning, I once believed my life was defined by what I endured. Now I know it is defined by what I finally chose. I ignored my mind for years, until it broke me. And in breaking me, it gave me back my life.